right. And for all my folks who are participating, I just want to make sure, can you guys see us? If you can just say so in the chat. Yes, all right. Thank you very much. My name is James Perry. I serve as CEO here at the Winston-Salem Urban League. And just in order to make sure that we are being judicious when it comes to time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My partner in civil rights, if you will, Alvin Carlisle, will join us shortly. But again, my name is James Perry, and welcome to all of you to Black Lives Matter, Protest to Policy, the opening plenary and discussion about voting rights. Vote like your life depends on it. So the Winston-Salem Urban League, of course, is a 70-year-old civil rights organization that advocates for social and economic progress and parity. And we're doing this event in partnership with the Winston-Salem NAACP. And of course, as I mentioned, the president of the NAACP, Reverend Alvin Carlisle, will join us in a few moments. And before we get too deep into things, I also want to take a moment and thank our partners, in particular, the Alpha Pi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, who were a great help in a number of ways, but in particular in promoting this event. Thank you to Alan Younger, who I see is a guest at this moment, as a matter of fact. Thank you to the Forever One Home cohort and to Grounded Solutions, who will help soon in the housing portion of these 5 events. So over the course of this week, we're going to host 5 different sessions, right? And the idea here is that we want to figure out how we move all of this incredible energy from simply being energy in the streets, which I want to be clear is incredibly important, to becoming policy change, right? I think that I may speak for many of the folks participating when I say that this is a moment when certainly many of us were overwrought with anger, overwrought with disgust as we had to bear witness to the murders of Breonna Taylor, of Ahmaud Arbery, to George Floyd, and most recently to Rayshard Brooks. And I think so many of us know that those are just the most recent names, that we can go down a very long list. Corrine Gaines, Sandra Bland, Maya Hall, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Philando Castile. We could spend our entire evening simply naming the names of African-American men and women, boys and girls who've died at the hands of police. But I also think that many of us have been overcome with optimism as we've borne witness to thousands and thousands and thousands of young people who've marched in the streets, frankly, risking their lives, knowing the danger of COVID-19, to make their voices heard and to say that we demand change. Not that we want change, not that we think that change should happen, but that we demand change. And that we're willing to risk our lives because we think that change is that fundamentally important. And so, you know, I think one of the things that certainly Reverend Carlisle and I have seen is that we've seen moments like this before, and nothing is exhilarating as this moment, but certainly moments where protests has happened. And we know that there's a short period of time. And during that period of time, if you're not able to transition and make clear what it is that you seek to achieve, that folks in City Hall, folks at the County Commission, folks at the State House and State Senate and in Congress won't get it done. And that you have to make sure that they feel the frustration and the anger and the disgust that you feel that made you get out into the streets in March. So I'll just say one more thing before I introduce my esteemed colleague, Reverend Carlisle. Before I got to the Urban League, I worked in fair housing. And of course, fair housing is this idea that everyone deserves a place to live, regardless of their race. And the law that we use to litigate cases in fair housing is the Federal Fair Housing Act. The Federal Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. Oftentimes when I talk about that law to young people, I'll ask them, what happened in 1968? And sometimes they'll say, I don't know, I can't, I wasn't born then. Well, the most important thing that happened in 1968 was that Dr. King was assassinated. There were riots all over the United States. And the Federal Fair Housing Act had been kind of bouncing around Congress for years, and they had no interest in it. But Lyndon Johnson went to Congress and said, look, we got to get these people to calm down. We got to quash these riots. And I need you to help me. I need you to pass this Federal Fair Housing Act in honor of Dr. King. And so 7 days after King's assassination, Congress passes the Federal Fair Housing Act. And it is the first time that African Americans have the same right as white Americans to own, transfer, and sell property in the United States of America. And it only happens because of Dr. King's sacrifice. And so there are certainly many more policies that get passed, but the fact that Black folks can actually own and sell property is only because of Dr. King's sacrifice. So I think when we look back 40 years from now at this moment, the question will become not, did we simply march in the streets, or did we actually get a policy change? And is there something that we can point to that made people's lives better? And did we make sure that George Floyd's death, that Breonna Taylor's death, that Ahmaud Arbery's death, that all of these names, all of these people who died, that their death ensured that the lives of all of the people who come after us are better? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Carlisle to offer remarks. Reverend Carlisle.
I'm here. All right, great. Glad to have everyone on tonight. I want to say thank you to my colleague, friend, James Perry. We decided to do these town halls together, but he very much has done the heavy lifting in pulling this together, and I'm grateful to him for that. He is a very sharp guy. I appreciate his work. And so we just wanted to talk really and pull these town halls together, as James has already said, to deal with harnessing this momentum. It's too great. It's not only national, but now international. That the voices of the people are being heard. People are taken to the streets. Finally, many finding their voices, lifting their voices, saying enough is enough. I had several people come to me and say, "Hey, so where's the NAACP? You know, where are these historic Black institutions? Where NAACP, Urban League? Where are these groups during this time?" And this movement was like a lot of powerful movements. It was born on the back of grassroots organizers who very much were young people who had the energy and the fervor and the frustration that it took to take to the street and to facilitate change. It's not always necessary that these historic institutions take the lead. You know, we're always here. And the truth about the movement, y'all, it has always been multi-generational. It takes some young, it takes some old, it takes the seasoned. I quote all the time Common's lyric in the epic song Glory, when he talks about the energy of the youth coupled with the wisdom of the elders. Now, I'm a little older than Perry, but we know that these historic organizations have been around for 100 years, and we serve a very distinct purpose in advancing our people. And our organizations were founded upon the creation of policy, a public policy that is fair, that is equitable, that helps those who are disenfranchised, adds a voice to those who have none, that gives space to those who have been left on the fringe of society, not being able to enjoy the benefits of the American dream, but have been simply left out. And so the foundation of these great organizations is great policy, is to take it to the streets. And Perry and I were talking earlier today. He said nobody has marched more than the NAACP. About it is we march, but we march with purpose, and we march on Washington, and we march on the U.S. Senator and the state senator, and we'll march on City Hall, and we'll march on the school board, but with exact purpose in mind, and that's the change of policy. And I know many young people that I've talked to recently said, but we need wholesale change. We need a destruction of this system that upholds the oppression of our people. We need new political constructs that would allow the advancement of all people, and not just some, not just the haves above the have-nots, not the whites above the blacks, but structure, political structures that would lift everybody. Well, the truth of the matter is that systems are held up by policy. Whether you create a new system or you go with the old system, both of them are advanced on the back of good policy. And if we change enough policy, perhaps the old system can turn into the new system, the system that is fair and equitable and just. And so we thought it was very important that we harness this energy, that we harness it into directing it into some tangible results, something that we can see, something that we can walk away from. What happens is a lot of times when you have energy without an ask, politicians will dictate to you the change. They'll have knee-jerk reactions or offer a quick policy that maybe sounds good on the surface, but does not bring any lasting, sustainable change. Good, sound policy brings lasting, sustainable change. And I'm hoping that out of these series of talks, that we will be able to have a consensus. Those who join this call, those partners who have joined on this call, these town halls, that we will be able to come together with some level of consensus on, here is the ask. Here is the ask. Here is what we need to ensure that what we have seen that seems to be not getting better but worse, that is an end to this, and that we see something different in these states. So I think it's an opportunity for us to have good discussion. I'm excited to hear the input for those. We have been able to garner a good group of individuals that can really speak to some of these issues. But we've had a lot of dialogue. But now I think it's time for us to turn dialogue into action, to turn protest into policy, to make sure that we can move forward in a very effective way. It's not only time for the voices of the people to be heard, but it's time for policy to be written. It's time for action to be put in place so that we can see a change in what we're looking at. My phone is always open. Anytime I can be of help to anyone. You want to talk, you want to have dialogue, you want to work together, please let me know.
All right. So we're going to try to keep this fairly conversational. We're going to go ahead and in a moment move into our voting rights discussion. Just a few quick notes before we do that. One is that we're going to try to end this conversation. Not we're going to try. We are going to end this conversation at 6:30 because there's a very important city council meeting tonight, and we know that a lot of folks want to be able to participate in that meeting, and frankly, I think maybe all three of us, if not most of us, intend to have some role in that city council meeting. So we want to end early enough so that people can get there for 7 o'clock. Second is that if you post, we have a few obviously conversation points, but if you have questions or comments, if you post them in the chat, then we will make sure that we bring as many of those questions and comments forward. And then last but not least, once this conversation is over, we're going to circulate a document that we're hoping that everyone will contribute to, and ultimately suggest policy ideas and concepts. And the idea will be that will be the starting point for this policy conversation. So with that, I want to introduce someone who likely needs no introduction. I mean, if you've even thought for a moment about voting rights in North Carolina, but certainly if you thought about them, your voting rights here in Winston-Salem, there's no way that Linda Sutton hasn't, you haven't thought about Linda Sutton, met Linda Sutton, or if you were standing at the end of one block, then you probably heard Linda Sutton yelling from the other end of the block, yelling that voting rights were fundamental, and that she would not rest until every single person, not just in Winston-Salem, not just in Forsyth County, and not just in North Carolina, but every single person in the United States had fair access to voting rights. So this is someone who's been organizing since the 70s, and who's worked in as a union organizer, who's been a special voter registration commissioner, and she co-founded the Winston-Salem Voting Rights Commission. And we could go on and on and on about all the different and incredible things that she's done. And I think the other part of this is that she's an incredible individual, but the organization that she works with, Democracy North Carolina, is an organization that when it comes to resources about voting rights, it's hard. It's really almost impossible to say that there's a better organization. When you want to know the most up-to-date information about what your rights are, even when voting rights have changed overnight, you can go to their website sometimes the very next morning, and they will have the most up-to-date information. So this is, again, one of the most incredible advocates when it comes to voting rights that I've ever met, Linda Sutton. Linda, thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking so much time tonight, particularly because I know you got 100 Zoom meetings, not just today, but pretty much every day right now.
Right. And your check is in the mail, James, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. And, this one quote out of my mind, some people give me a little backlash for quoting it, but Ari Berman in his book, Give Us a Ballot, said that voting make all other rights possible. To a great degree, that's true. Voting rights can't change a person's heart or give them more, but certainly it can change policies and laws. But I try to instill in people the reason why I'm advocate for voting is that if you can tie voting to issue, even the issue that's going on now with brutality, we really got involved and killed. And we found that a lot of people in that community were not registered, majority just, and tried to figure out, okay, let's just not tear place, let's have a goal. And they had a goal, they had a strategy, boycotting the buses, they had a strategy. The lunch counter sit-ins, they had a strategy goal. But our democracy is such that you keep fighting continuously, because just as we've won the right to sit at a lunch counter and eat, there are people who are trying to turn that back. They want to petition the government to be able to refuse service to anybody they want to, and you know who that anybody is, okay? So you have to keep fighting for the democracy. But I appreciate you asking me to come. When I first started at Democracy North Carolina, I was working county. Like, okay, how does it work in 20 counties? So I have main counties right now. We have research on money and politics. We've called out Republicans and some Democrats, and so we believe right is right and what's wrong is wrong. So I want to talk a little bit about this moment that we're trying to navigate through with this COVID, and we're now look what's happening. We have elected officials who are making decisions. You can open up your business, whether you can go out in the street, whether you can, whatever, what you want to do. I mean, they're making decisions, it's up to us to determine whether we're going to follow those decisions. But when laws, better follow them else. So a lot has happened with recent infections, and it's changed the way we do organize the ground. So my life has been turned upside down with Zoom calls and, looking Twitter, chat, and all that stuff my grandkids do. And, but I'm having to learn all that stuff right now. We've been disconnected for months from our interactions with people. We've got to rethink, and we just how long we're going to be in this moment. It's hard to tell people we want you to go out and say the registration. You don't want to endanger people, but there are people who are doing it. People are healthier and younger, but it really doesn't matter how old, but there are people who do take those chances. And on top of that, we have, with the protests. And I tell people, yes, you exercise your First Amendment right. You got the right to protest and petition your government, to address an issue. But it's got that after we protesting, let's protest today, register to vote tomorrow, and vote like crazy in November. And message get out to people. So we don't really know how elections are gonna come off in November. Still have fun, and people don't think much. I know you all saw Georgia with the long lines. That's happening across the country again. Voter purges last year, North Carolina either purged or put in an inactive status over 507,000 voters.
Wow.
Now, if that's not voter suppression, you tell me what. And it's just not North Carolina now. North Carolina's been a test case for years, but California, 8,000, and all across the country. So we're still fighting the same battles of voter suppression that we have been for a while. We're dealing with boards of elections, submit budgets to the commissioners, and we've been fighting in Alamance County. County Commission wanted to cut the elections budget by 54%, and you know what that means. Oh, you're going to cut out all your workers, you're going to cut out your voting sites, So we're trying to do a little bit of advocacy there. And so early voting plans, we've always had to fight for those because, some people just don't believe in early voting and they don't have voting on Sunday. And, we have to get the of early voting elections. So it's a continual fight on and on and on. So the tradition is that we've done organizing through going out doing voter registration drives in high schools and Greek oils and, having fundraising, it's a little different right now. It can be done. We may be doing non-traditional organizing on social media and, webinars and conference calls, but just in the 60s, did they any of this stuff? Okay. Did they have an internet? So it can be done. Great change can happen, if we stick together. The most important thing I wanted to tell you about today was the bill that the governor signed, I think it was Friday, HB 1161. The bill was introduced some relief because of COVID. Of course, our General Assembly introduced a ID bill. Of course, you don't photo ID in November because the federal Winston-Salem blocked it, but they still put it in the bill. But we still have to go to court for that photo ID.
So Linda, I want you to just take one moment and pause here, because there are all kinds of. When I look at the names of folks who are attending this event, I see folks who are longtime activists, and I see people who are just start learning about issues like voting rights. Can you take a moment and explain what's the problem with voter ID?
Well, I can tell you when this bill first came up in 2013, when we were fighting it so hard, we found people, elderly people who were born at home and never had a birth certificate. They had been voting all their life, but now a new restriction. We found matching the Department of Motor Vehicles, because that was one of the ways in the bill that they wanted you to, use the DMV. Well, we matched DMV with the voter registration through the Board of Elections, and overwhelmingly, people, our people of color would be disenfranchised because more likely than anybody else not to have a specific type of ID. Courts from here all the way up to the Supreme Court have struck down as one of the ID restrictions because they were proven to be discriminatory and discriminatory against communities of color. And there are all types of reasons. You had to have a birth certificate. People that lived, they were born in Dakota somewhere. You've got to, write a letter, call, do something, run down a birth certificate. A lot of people didn't have birth certificates, couldn't find a birth certificate, So there are lots of reasons why people have been voting all years without that requirement. And, when you want to make a case that we need this photo ID because people are voting and there's a lot of voter fraud, that was disproven. No voter fraud. And it's just a way, now just think about all the voter suppression and all the bills that's happened since 2013, acquiring more observers, people who can challenge place and on and on and on. Just think about, you just disenfranchise a few here for various reasons. You can easily win, and in my opinion, steal an election. So photo is, especially for people who've been, they tried it with students. They didn't want to use the students' ID, and every could think of even moving polling away from colleges. I don't know if you all remember, when they tried to move one of the college polling almost to the city limit with no parking lot, no bus route, no nothing. And so all of these things, in little increments everywhere, especially in North Carolina, the test case, and then everybody else across the country is doing the same thing. If you stand in line in the rain for 4 or 5 hours, after about hours, most people are gonna go home, okay? And you have to really, use all your levers. You have to attend your Board of Elections meetings, have to speak, and commissioners are supposed to fund your elections, and we have to demand that they do that.
So
you get ready to say?
Yeah. So fundamentally, though, with voter ID, the core issue is that they make it just one step more difficult for people to vote, and certainly it is the case that if you are low income, and let's say that you're on a fixed income and that your entire income for the month is $300 or $400, that even though an ID card or a driver's license may, for folks who have a higher income, it may seem like it's only $25. That $25 is a lot if you're on a fixed income. But not only is it a lot if you're on a fixed income, but the process of getting transportation to and from there, and the process of gathering all the documentation to be able to get it becomes both expensive financially, but then also in terms of the time commitment. And if you work a job that is a 9-to-5 low-wage job, then you have to take time off from work in order to be able to go there to get your ID. And I guess the issue is that we're talking about something that most people believe should be a right. All right, it's this idea that your ability to participate in democracy should be a right. And so, but if there's a financial barrier in the form of an ID, then it means that it can't be a right because you're barred from participating by this financial obligation. Right? That's
right. And North Carolina spent fighting this first ID, spent over $11 million, litigating this. I mean, that's how bad they wanted photo ID. The kind of money we could have been using that money on all types of things, Head Start and everything else. So yeah, there are lots of reasons why photo ID is, and it's never been proven. I don't know anybody that wants to go and vote twice deliberately. You know, who, I mean, really, I could understand a person maybe voting, doing early voting, and they don't understand the process, and they see everybody's going election day, go on election day, but safeguards in place and tech stuff. So I don't see our brothers and sisters who are Latino. I don't see breaking the door down to go and vote fraudulently. It don't happen. It's hard to try to get that community to vote, period. And we're not even going to talk about the census, because if we don't try to get people interested in the census, we're losing all types of money for our community. And that's an important issue. When I served on the committee in 20, I'm telling you, the money that our community lost, not only money, but lost representation here at the state level and in Congress, because people were afraid to give their information. And right now with ICE, you know, we're going to have a hard time convincing people to fill out a census form because happening with ICE.
Now, Linda, I want to go back, because you were talking about, and I interrupted you to ask about voter ID, but you were telling us about the new law that the governor just signed,
right?
And about the items that were in that bill.
Yeah. So one thing it did was it opened up funding for the boards of elections. So Forsyth County. I think Forsyth County is getting about $413,000 to help with their elections. Okay, so that's a good thing. Of course, there are going to be limitations, reporting requirements, and everything else. You know, I hope it don't be like the money don't trickle down. But anyway, but that was in the bill, the matching funding. Now, the biggest piece was absentee voting. And so before, you used to have signatures or a notary, but now you only need a signature. So that's a good thing. No notary, just one signature. You can request your absentee ballot request form online, by fax, by email, by phone. Of course, they haven't given the parameters and written all the guidelines, but that's better than having to download the request form, fill it out, and then. So if I can request it through an email or phone or fax, that's a good thing. There's also a barcode so voters can track their ballot. Because a lot of people say, well, you know, if I vote a provisional, or if I vote out absentee, I don't think my ballot's going to count. So they're addressing that. And we did have something called a MAT team, which was made up of, it used to be a Democrat and a Republican, and they could be called to a nursing home, assisted living center, and they can help people with requesting a ballot, you know, filling out the ballot, whatever, doing the envelope. But they've made some changes to that, and it's supposed to be more flexible, but we don't know what that is right now. In-person voting, they did relax the rules on the partisan composition in your polling place. I don't know if that's good or not, because it used to be that the polling place chair was of the governor's party. So if you're relaxing the rules around partisan composition, what is that going to look like? Fair boards of elections will try, you know, they will try to make it fair, but not everybody is of goodwill. Okay. There's also flexibility for your out of precinct poll workers, because generally in a polling place, they try to who vote in that area, in that precinct, to work inside the polling place. But, you know, for years, if we didn't have enough staff at a polling place, we'd bring people in. And so I guess a lot of counties were not doing that. So they've relaxed the rules on that, where, you know, they can bring in people from outside. Now, the ugliest piece is that photo ID piece. They stuck it in again, but we'll have to see what's going to happen with that, because ID is still blocked for this general election in November. Like, still have to go to court. So
it's blocked through through litigation, correct?
yes, it's in Judge Big hands right now. Okay, right here in Winston-Salem. Okay, so right, we have to, and there, look, there people are suing all over the place, and state NAACP is one of the good ones. I mean, they're suing a heartbeat, you know. And you know, Democracy North Carolina was on to, you know, signed under this bill, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and, you know, League of Women Voters, and individual plaintiffs too. So we're lucky to have organizations like the Southern Coalition and groups that'll, you know, give bono work. And they are really good. They've been fighting photo ID and gerrymandering for years, and we've had a lot of success. But you have to keep doing it over and over. And when, you know, I make a lot of examples when I'm talking to people about connecting their vote to what's happening on the ground. When the coal ash spill happened up at the Dan River, perfect case why your vote mattered, because the governor worked for Duke Energy, retired. When he became governor, he had the right to appoint the people who served on the environmental board, who was responsible for approving rate hikes for Duke, consequently approved a rate hike for us to pay for up of the spill. So if you tie everything back to your vote, you voted for them. You know, we're talking about police accountability. Okay, we vote for the city council. They hire the city manager who hires the police. There's some public safety, there's some accountability. It's your vote. It's your vote. And if we can tie your vote back to a lot of injustices has happened, you know, I quote a lot of people, because throughout the years, a lot of people have really had some great quotes. And I remember one that Franklin Roosevelt said, that nobody will ever deprive the American people of the right to vote except the American people themselves. And the only they can do that is by not voting. And so I say again, we can't change a racist heart or mean-spirited heart or give a person morals, but we can sure change policies and laws that affect our lives. And that's why I love voting rights so much, and that's why I fight for it. So we still have a long way to go.
So you touched on this, but I want to make sure that we provide as much clarity as we can. And I know that bill was just signed, and so Democracy NC is still working out the details and figuring out exactly how it's going to affect people.
Right.
But one of the hot button issues is the mail-in ballot. You know, will we have mail-in ballots? Is it a good thing? And what do you think the process is going to look like?
We already had mail-in ballots, and it was through absentee voting. Okay.
Right.
But there were people, a lot of people across the country. We have 2 or 3 states that only do mail voting, you know, and it's worked well for them, you know, but a lot of people, especially when the US government started talking about blocking funding to the post office, then I'm seriously blocking to the post office. People started rethinking, well, we don't want maybe not to have all mail voting, but have a combination. We can do things like extend absentee voting instead of those 17 days, make it a whole month, make it 2 months. You know, there's some other things that they can do. One would be putting a prepaid postage on your envelope, you
Mhm.
know, but for that, you know, of course they're going to say money, but that was one thing we fought for too. Online voter registration, passed online voter registration through the DMV, but you need a driver license or a DMV ID, you know, and for people who are not online, you know, that's not such a good idea, but we would like to expand that, that online voter registration. We even found, excuse me, some places, you know, really fight to have the boards of elections have a drop box outside the door that's secure, that you can put your voter registration form and stuff, just simple, you know, simple things. We tried to lower the age of a person working in a place from 17 to 16. That didn't fly. They didn't go for that. Always wanted the during election day to be a holiday, although the schools are not open during the presidential general election. They are during the primary, and there was a time when they tried to take all of the polls out of schools, trying to say that it was a safety fact. We've had them in schools for years and years and years and never had problems, you know. So, you know, there are a lot of things that we wanted but could not get, but we are monitoring the legislature when they start having their rulemaking sessions, so we can offer suggestions and be on top of the rules when they, you know, implement them around all of the absentee voting and requesting your ballot online and all of that. So yeah,
It's
we got funding coming, but but we, you know, we don't know. People are afraid. People are afraid, especially after the primary. We had a lot of people that told the Board of Elections they were not gonna be working the poll in November. So there's a shortage of poll workers. You know, that's a problem. And the first thing we think about is hiring a temporary worker. Well, that's, but you're losing that expertise from people who have worked in a polling place for years and years. And then you don't want to train them fully. Um, you know, assistants in the polling place are not to get training. Anybody that works in a polling place need to be trained, if you ask me. But the assistants are not required to. So you have a lot of training issues. Poll workers giving out the wrong information and not being able to set up the equipment in the right way. So there are a lot of things wrong, but we're slowly trying to get it right. And, you know, if you've got a good board of elections and you hire a good person that trains, like the person that trained here in Forsyth County just left. And so, you know, you have to stay on top of that. And let me just say this so I can hush, that our democracy is in our hands. We have to fight every way that they throw things at us, okay? And it's not, and don't get me wrong, it's not just one party, okay? It's not one party. We had one party that overthrew the whole. The only we had in North Carolina was in Wilmington in 1898. So it's not, it's, you know, it's not just a party, okay? So it's democracy. You have to fight, because when people get in power, it's about that power, okay? And trying to get a little bit of it. But if the citizens ever realize we got the power, you know, if we use it, but unfortunately, we don't use it.
so and Alvin, you should jump in at any point.
Mhm.
But so one more important, or at least I certainly think important question here. One of the issues that we've seen happen over and over again relative to elections, and it certainly has dramatically affected the most recent set of elections, is gerrymandering, right? And so we've seen districts drawn in a way that was that disadvantaged minority communities in an extreme way, and then certainly we've seen this most recent state Supreme Court ruling that decided that you couldn't draw or gerrymander districts in a way that that were overtly and extremely partisan. And so, can you take us through what what gerrymandering is and what's the problem with gerrymandering, and then ultimately, yeah, how we prevent it from happening in the future.
Alvin. So it goes back to the census, because the majority party in the General Assembly redraws the district lines, okay? Gerrymandering was a way that you would redraw those lines supposedly to even out the power that legislators would have. But what we have seen is backdoor maps from people out of state who really just intentionally districts favor of one party against one candidate. It was so bad that they drew district lines right through A&T. That was a perfect example. You know, it confuses voters, confuses them, and it lessens their you know, if you think about how important the General Assembly is to having legislators who will fairly redraw those district lines and don't pander them in a way that gives a majority of the power to one party is the goal. But we've been fighting since Mayor Watt, and how many years ago was Mayor Watt when we had Eva Clayton, and it's always, we've been in court fighting it forever, to me, as long as I can remember. So it's a matter of having legislators elected who would do the right thing. We've had people who we contracted with to bring in from California to redraw lines, but it keeps over and over. You know, we're into another census and another redistricting process next year, and we haven't finished on the last one. You know, so you know, that's why you have to keep, and every generation has to keep doing it over and over. You have to keep doing it, because that's the way a democratic society works. You have to demand, you have to fight for it, and you have to be involved. Or
yeah, you know,
a person said, who was that? Eli Wiesel said, evil flourishes when good people do nothing. And that's what happens when we don't get involved and we don't vote. Then people who are just grabbing power and are giving money to their friends and increasing rates, you know, for their buddies, you know, the good old boy network. So we have to maintain our involvement at every turn.
You know, one of the things.
So I don't know if I answered your question. Go ahead.
You did, but I would also just go a step further to say that you know, so I had been paying attention. So I'm not, as you know, but as some of the folks who joined us may not know, I'm not from. Well, I didn't grow up here in North Carolina and in Winston-Salem. I was born in Greensboro, but I grew up in New Orleans. And so, but just before we moved back, when I was paying attention to voting issues and to who the members of Congress were, I was shocked because you know, I looked and I could see that there were, and I'm going to get these numbers wrong, if there were 15 members of Congress, then you know, 12 or 13 were Republicans and only 2 or 3 were Democrats. But then when I looked at the voter registration, what I could see was that about half were Democrats and about half were Republicans. And it blew my mind. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't understand it.
That's
right?
what gerrymandering does, right?
Right. And so for so long, you know, North Carolina was known as a purple state, right? A state where it could in a presidential election or in a governor's race, it could go Republican or it could go Democrat. But where it had been kind of split down the line in terms of its representation, but all of a sudden it had completely transformed so that it just leaned so heavily Republican. And immediately when I saw, for a moment I said, well, how the heck did that happen? But within about 30 seconds, I realized it's two things: it's money in politics and gerrymandering. And it was that that the districts had been redrawn so that they had pushed all of the Democrats into just a few districts, and so therefore the result was that that you only had a few Democratic members of Congress, and so then it ends up giving Republicans this incredible advantage in Congress. And so, you know, when you watch, and I'm the kind of nerd who will wake up in the morning and watch C-SPAN and then watch it all day. But when you watch and you see the decisions that are made and the outcomes, and you watch the debate and you see just how difficult it is to get progressive policies through Congress, you can see the effect that gerrymandering has. And it's not just an effect that happens on the federal level, but it's an effect that also happens when it comes to the state house and the state senate. And so it's one of these issues that that, to your point, is a long-lasting issue, right? That we are right now preparing for or in the midst of a new census, but we are dealing with gerrymandering issues and litigation that is the result of the prior census from 10 years ago, right? We are dealing with the 2010 census data and trying to get fair districts from the 2010 census data, but we are doing the 2020 census right now. I mean, so it gets me to, I think, something that is less about this policy question or these policy questions, but this is a more of a personal question for you that I want to ask, and it is one particularly when I looked out at all the folks, the young folks who were marching here in Winston-Salem, who were marching in Greensboro, who were painting the ground in Washington, D.C. And I looked and I could see that so many of them weren't professional activists, weren't people who had been activists for years and years and years, but who were students and who had regular jobs, and because of COVID-19, they had time, right? But you've been doing this since the 70s. How do you maintain your commitment to a cause like this when you know that you're going to win some battles, but you're going to lose an awful lot of battles? How do you stay committed for decade after decade after decade?
All right, don't be telling my age now. Talking about all those but because it's like it's ingrained in me, and I think about I've been on marches, strikes, boycotts, protests. I mean everything throughout my life, and I'm telling you, I'm not through, but I just want our focus for the young people, the people coming behind me who's got to lead this movement. They've got to lead this movement. And I want them to think more on the strategy and the goal, what you're trying. Now, when I talk about voting rights, I always say, well, that's not going to help the systematic racism. It can change some policies and laws, yeah. But we know that systematic racism is ingrained in this country in every institution. So that's a big lift, And other person, I love quoting people. I think of stuff myself, but I quote everybody else, that talks about, there may be times we can't do anything about all the injustices that are happening in the world. But one thing for sure, you can never cease protesting them. You have to keep fighting. And I've done all of this marching and protesting and still in a state of systematic racism. But I don't want my children and my grandchildren I have 5 great-grandchildren, and I have grandsons with dreadlocks that are real dark skinned, and I fear for them. And I'm determined I'm gonna do whatever I can so the people can understand you need to be at the table. You need to run for office. You need to be on a board and table, where all the laws and policies are being made. Just don't sit back on the sideline and think people gonna give you something. Ain't nobody gonna give you nothing. You gotta demand it for it. And that's what I continuously want to do. And I do it as long as I live, because I've seen enough injustice and it's just getting worse and worse. But the people power, we just have to learn how to teach those coming behind us how to use that power, how to put that power together. So I don't know what else motivates me. Every time I look at my grandson's face and, he's driving to work, and I'm thinking about, and it's real. It is very real. And so I don't know what else to tell you what motivates me. I love this work. I believe that there is power in voting. It's just that we have to educate every generation coming behind us. You have to keep doing it over and over.
So we have,
James,
I'm sorry.
James, can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah, please.
If I would, I'm just, and you said something, Linda said something, both of you talked about her decades of work. I'm here at our branch office, and right outside of this room that I'm sitting is a picture of a much younger Linda Sutton, receiving awards, hard at work, and she has truly been at this work for a long time. But while you were talking about that, it really challenged me, because I think about when I talk to a lot of young people now, they feel so disenfranchised that they do really want to drop out of the process. And partisanship in government has really turned them off. But my thing is, and the point you made, and I just wanted to reiterate it. You say you quote everybody, but I want to quote you. At the end of the day, it's about using that power of the ballot. You don't have to be. I've spent most of my life as an independent. I spent some time as a young man as a Republican. I know y'all say, "Ouch." Amen. As a young man, I spent a little time as a Republican, and now I spent a number of years as a Democrat. But I've always been in the process. I've always exercised my right to the ballot, because I believe it's where we can. Dr. King said something powerful. He said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it's bent towards justice. And a lot of times I get afraid, because I feel like we have young people who really want to fight for change, but they don't understand that you have to change this policy, that policy, this policy. And as we continue to change policy, then eventually we can get better systems. We can get a better government. We can get we can have a state that elects a Democratic governor. How do we elect a Democratic governor, but then have an overwhelmingly Republican state
gerrymandering?
Gerrymandering at its best, and so, but if we can get policies and politicians, one thing I quote Earlene Palmer all the time, and she used to tell me, she said, if you're going to change policy, you have to change the policy
makers. That's right.
And I want, especially the young people who are joining us on this town hall, to understand that if you really are frustrated about policy, you have to change the policy maker. You have to elect somebody who thinks like you, and regardless of what their party, who thinks like you, who is willing to bring about the change, that you want. And I'm grateful for you and the fight and the work that you've done over these years. And you said that Perry told you, telling your age, but you look real good, so don't even worry about it.
Well, thank you. And I want people to take this lesson from 1898, because we had more Black people in elected office in Wilmington, North Carolina, that Republican and Democrats who marched them office, killed them, ran them out of town. The Democrats did. The Blacks were Republicans holding office. So, times change. We have this saying, we don't have any friends and no permanent enemies. It's about having good morals, being true to what your oath is, because you have good and bad on both sides. Trust me. You heard the saying, kin ain't all skin ain't kin, because we've had blacks who did the thing, you know what I'm saying? So we've had Democrats do the right thing, and just like Republicans. So what we have to figure, train up. I remember when I first started in the early days, and I was a precinct chairperson, we would try to, candidates would come to the precinct meeting, come from the neighborhood. I live in this precinct and I'm gonna run for sport. Now they'll move from out of state, come in here and run for office. So, politics is now, but we figure out how we grow a new generation of people who believe in that democracy and who want to do the right thing. But my last thing I'm gonna say, James, is I saw Daphne was saying there were 237,000 inactive voters. The rest of people who were removed. What we're trying to do in North Carolina is we've got the list. Some of those people have re-registered. And so we're going to be taking action trying to get those people back. In Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, had over 7,000 people of color removed from the rolls. So we still have a fight. We have to continuously register people. I tell people turn 18 every day, So that's what we are, continuous fight.
So and as you probably know fairly well, Linda, and I know Reverend Carlisle knows, I'm an absolute nerd, and so we're about 25 minutes away from our end time. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and make sure that I'm doing a good job of keeping up with the policy issues. We've had kind of a free-flowing conversation, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have a clear set of policy issues that we're moving forward with. I think we all recognize Democracy NC's leadership when it comes to these issues, but we want to make sure that that folks who don't do this every day understand what the issues are and how they can plug in. And so we want to make sure that they're clear on what the issues are, and be it that they, if they decide to plug in with Democracy North Carolina, if they decide that they want to reach out to the NAACP and be supportive of their efforts, or if there's another organization, because there are some other organizations who are doing really strong work around voting rights. We want to make sure that they're well informed. So one of the first things that I heard you talk about, and I heard you talk about it in a really nuanced way, are budgets, right? This idea that in some counties and in some communities, we saw folks try to cut the budgets of all the entities that oversaw voting. And I've heard people say this a number of times, but I've heard people say it over and over again in the last few weeks, and it's that budgets are moral documents, right? You can see the priorities of a community, you can see the priorities of anyone who's in charge based on how they allocate their money. And so when you see people decide to cut the budget of that determines how people vote and who can vote, then you can see that that certainly they're trying to make sure that there are barriers to voting. And it's one of those kinds of things that's very boring. And so if you see someone cut the budget for a department that oversees voting, you might not realize that is an activist issue that you need to be working on and really focused on. So that's the number one issue is any budget from a state standpoint to a local standpoint that oversees budgeting, voting in your community. So the second issue that we've been talking about is gerrymandering, right? We've talked about this idea that if you're voting and you're exercising your right to be heard as a voter, but if you've been packed into a district with all the other people who are in the same party as you, then it sets it up so that only a few members of your party are able to be a member of Congress or a member of the state legislature. And so as a result, your voice is not heard in the way that it should or would be if there had been a fair process for dividing districts instead of an unfair gerrymandering process. And what we've seen is gerrymandering that can be illegal or unfair because of race. But under state law, we've also seen unfair and illegal gerrymandering based on party. And so that's a second issue to watch out for. I think the third one that we've talked about that we put a lot of time into is voter ID, right? And we've talked about this idea that that when you say to someone that they have to show up with an ID, that it is a barrier, that we run into elderly people who have never had an ID. We run into young people and to people of all ages, frankly, who are low income and for whom getting an ID is a challenge. And then also to the extent that for most people, when they think of ID, they think of driver's license. When you look at the data around arrests and around and incarceration, a lot of it is related to, particularly for African American men and Latinos, it is related to restrictions around driving and driver's license, and so a lot of times that ends up being a core barrier to voter ID, to the right to vote. And then we've seen this issue of purging, right? And so we've heard this data point of 300,000 people being purged from the polls, and it's not just whether or not you're purged from the polls, but also that sometimes you might show up and you might not even necessarily know or realize that you've been purged. And if you've been purged, then and I think I'll need you to weigh in as an expert here. If you show up and your name has been purged, can you re-register at that moment on election day, or do you have a right to vote at that point? You don't, right?
I tell people the best thing we have going is early voting, because you can, if you're not in the books, you can register right then and vote. But once you till election day, you're in trouble.
That's right.
So if the more education we do and pushing for early voting, that's why we work so hard, good early voting plans, on the weekends and stuff, because you saving, they decided to get rid of that, we are definitely in trouble. So yes, you can re-register doing early voting, but election day, the law on the books by October 9th in order to vote on election day.
Right. So if you've been purged and you've held off until election day and you don't know that you've been purged, when you show up, you're not going to be able to vote.
You're not going to be able to vote. So what I'll do is get every organization, all your networks through social media, all your family, all your friends, your co-workers, your neighbors. We need to step up as voters and educate people. You can look up whether you've been purged from, on your phone, and you can tell just then, that quick, you can register to vote online. You can request your absentee ballot form. I mean, there are lots of things we can do, and we have our fingers, but people have to know about it. And when people are out doing voter registration, take your cell phone with you. Look them up. If people are not sure, type them into the database. See if they're in there. So that's our saving grace, is that, we need to spread the word, educate, because if we don't educate people, what else do we have to educate people? And it takes more than just organization or your organization or the NAACP. It's going to take all of us trying to reach out to all of our networks and have, actually check themselves. If we get a billboard that say, from the rows here, You know, I try to think of traditional ways, and you know, we have a lot of people want to do Instagram and all that stuff, but no, that's okay for some people, but we need, you know, the traditional ways, you know, public service announcements, you know, stuff like that. People write op-eds to the paper. They may not take a newspaper in their yard, but they read it online, you know. We just have to use every means that we have at our fingertips to educate people about that. So we're doing some postcard writing and all the other stuff, you know, most people are doing, but we're doing a lot of training, webinars and stuff, but it's going to take people power to get other people educated and voting.
So
and you can go to our website at Democracy, North Carolina, or you can go to ncvoter.org and keep up with all the latest legislation and rules around absentee, and you know, and we have a toll-free number that you call that they can help you with completing the forms. The same 1-888-OUR-VOTE that people report problems voting to. Because we have it staffed with lawyers who can help us, you know, doing early voting on election day.
And I want to just make sure I have some clarity when it comes to absentee voting and in this concept of mail-in voting, particularly around the timing, right? So right now, obviously, as you've noted, we already have absentee ballot as an option for any North Carolinian. What is the deadline by which you have to submit your absentee ballot?
Okay, you have to submit your ballot request form by 5 o'clock on the Tuesday before the election. So that would be October 7th. They give you a week to request it, but you've got to have it filled out and returned by 5 o'clock on election day. So that's a good thing, November 3rd. Yeah, but if you, go ahead.
That's interesting. So you got to make sure that you're timely in requesting it, but as long as you request it early, you got all the way until 5 o'clock on election day to turn it in.
Yes,
but they have to receive it by mail.
Yes, well, you can a ballot and see by that happens.
And Linda, you froze for a second there, so I just want to make sure I wanted to get you to repeat that.
You can actually return your voted ballot in person. Your absentee ballot request form, by the time that deadline, October 27th, we will have all types of ways to get that. You may call in. I see my internet connection is unstable. You can call in and request it. See, by Tuesday, October 27th, the laws will have changed. We can fax in our request, you know, email our request, you know, but that's the date that's on the books right now. And since the governor signed the bill, it's going to change. So you will, you know, I don't think they've changed that deadline. You still have to request it by the week before election day. But the way you request it was probably going to change: email, phone, fax, or whatever.
Okay, got it. Okay, all right. Okay, and then here's my last question for you. So we know these key policy issues. What does if you could just wave a wand, right, and fix elections in North Carolina and across America and make them perfectly fair, tell us what those elections would look like. What are the other policy items that you would pass? I mean, what would our voter experience be like if Linda Sutton could just wave that magic wand?
Well, one thing, I would make sure that we have fair redistricting so we can elect the representatives of our choice. Okay. But as far as election day, I mean, I would have election, the primary and the general, make it a holiday so people don't have to go to work. Make it a holiday. Ain't no big deal. They close the schools in November for election day. The schools are not open, so why not do it in the primary? Why do you just give us 17 days of early vote? Got to fight for Saturday every election, and fight for Sunday, which I don't know what they think is wrong with Sunday. Let's extend that. We can have vote. Look, let's have voting all year from the primary. Once they've done the canvass and that is over, hey, let's start voting for the. There's nothing standing in the way of that at all. It's just they put rules in place. It's the people who you elected, and I tell people, if you didn't vote, you elected them anyway. So I would have, right, you did. So I would expand everything we have, just expand it.
Right. Awesome. All right.
And there's so many things around voting. I mean, really, even if you think about your board of election members that are appointed by the parties, if the parties don't appoint and approve people who advocate for you, you don't need people on your board of elections who's going to say, well, I don't think we need that in the black. Now, I don't think Winston-Salem State as an early voting site. I don't care if they don't have cars on. You need strong people. And when you have power, you need to use your power. If you have 5 members on your board of elections and the state, and right now you have 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. When it was reversed, when the Republicans were the majority, they used their power. Trust me, they use their power. So you have to have people who are willing to fight at all levels. And so there's a lot to voting. It's not as simple as just going to vote. And we lost straight ticket voting. That was what our community relied on, straight ticket voting. They depended on being able to just say Democrat or just say Republican. They felt safe. But now they either have to take a flyer from a person who's working at the polling place to tell them who to vote for, or they have to do their own research, which they need to these candidates. They will tell you anything, I'm telling you. But there are types of things, that I would want. You shouldn't have to pay the return ballot. If it's not sealed, they won't count it. If you don't have the right signatures, they won't count it. There's a lot when it comes to getting your ballot counted, getting it and getting it counted. And people need to know, because I've been on there plenty of times when, where they threw it out because, it wasn't sealed. There's another thing, the postage stamp. It has to be a post office stamp on it. You either have to have a regular postage stamp or the post office have to stamp it. And if it is not, they won't count it. And so that's why I say there's so much to voting that most people don't even know. And the other thing people don't know is they work for you. And you have the power to walk up in the Board of Elections office on they're counting the ballots and watch them count the ballots. It belongs to the people whose provision of ballots. They say then we have a right to see them. We have a right. And so people don't even think they can do stuff like that, But if they keep in mind that this democracy, it belongs to us, the people, and they exercise their right, it will go a long ways to having, fair elections and people who are elected that, want to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, so, Linda Sutton, I certainly, Reverend Carlisle and I, we want to thank you taking this time tonight. We know how busy you are. We know how busy you've been, and for how long. And we know that there's not much that happens around voting rights in North Carolina that doesn't have your voice as part of it. And we appreciate not just your voice and your work tonight, but your voice and your work over the course of, I won't give away your age, but over a significant amount of time.
I think I gave it away when I told you how many great grands I had. I got 5 great grands and I have 10 grands. But you know, I'm getting in there.
Hey. Reverend Carlisle, any closing remarks before we close out?
And my closing remark, I just really want to say, let's take and run with what the great Linda Sutton said. She said, reach out to your organizations, reach out to your networks, use your organizations and networks. Make sure that you get folk registered, that folk who are not registered, you get them registered. And not only that, but let's make sure we get the family. We got to get the family to the poll. Time and time again, in every election, numbers, it proves out every election. If we show up, we win. We have the numbers.
Right.
A lot of people have become disenfranchised because they believe that these folk who don't love justice, who don't love equity, outnumber us, and it's not so. They just vote at a higher clip than we do. We control the narrative. People who love justice, we outnumber them. So we have to show up. Use your networks. One other thing I want to add, James, you mentioned about how that elections affect our voting lines in Congress and in the State House, but also want to mention even our local elections are influenced, you know, by voting boards and voting districts, even county commissioners and school board and city council. All of those things are determined by voting lines. So it's important. So if you just even engage here in local government, you know, and not as much on the federal level, it is still important for you to vote, because even these local elections are determined by voting lines, and we have to see an end to gerrymandering as we know it. But just appreciate being able to share tonight. Again, I want to thank Linda Sutton for coming on, and everybody that played a part tonight.
Thank you, Reverend Carlisle, and I agree. I think when it comes to those local elections, it's even easier to have a fundamental effect on the election, because sometimes it's only 1,000 people turning out for a city council election, and you might know 500, you might know a few hundred people, and that can shift the result of the election. So just a few housekeeping notes. One is, no matter how it sounded in the course of this conversation, all of our organizations are nonpartisan organizations, and we, our real focus here is on the work of making sure that voices are heard, and so sometimes that means being willing to work incredibly hard in a way that means that you have to have relationships across the aisle. Sometimes it means having relationships just on one side of the aisle. But in the end, our focus is really on serving our constituency, the people and the communities that we care about. The second thing is I mentioned, that there's an important city council meeting tonight. The city budget is being heard this evening, and ultimately, it is. I said earlier, I believe that budgets are moral documents. Ultimately, if there is a concern about the funding level of the police department, or a concern about whether or not there's enough funding in programs that support low-income communities, if there's a concern about whether or not we are properly funding any issue that any of us in this meeting are concerned about with our tax dollars, then this budget hearing is the place to make sure your voice is heard. So that meeting starts at 7 o'clock. I'm posting in the chat a link to the press release that has information about how you can watch the meeting online, or about how you can call in order to address the city council. And so it's a virtual meeting, and if you want to offer comments, you have to call a phone number, and then you can and make your comments via phone call. So I just want to make sure that you all have that information and that you're able to participate. And then I also posted, of course, the schedule for the next few sessions. We have an exciting set of panelists lined up for the meetings coming up on the events coming up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I think you, while Reverend Carlisle and I will be participating, I think you'll see a little bit less of us on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and more of other voices. Because I think, as Reverend Carlisle said, our goal isn't always to be out in front when it comes to the marching and efforts. It is really to make sure that the work is done, and so we seek to uplift the other voices. Make sure you. Earlier, I posted a link to Democracy North Carolina's website. Make sure you visit that website and learn everything you can about the work that they're doing and about the amazing Linda Sutton. And with that, and of course, you already know that the NAACP, of course, is the boldest and the baddest, and of course, the oldest civil rights organization. I have no qualms about saying that. And I think I posted a link to the NAACP Winston-Salem's website. Reverend Carlisle just not that long ago had the website redone, and it looks amazing. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, or if it's been a while since you've been, make sure you visit their website and take a look at all the wonderful work that they've been doing. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out on time, and I hope to see or hear as many folks as possible in the City Council meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you all very, very much for your advocacy and for your hard work.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right.